boundaries? Do you have any? Or are boundaries the bane of your fucking existence? Are you struggling with not being firm enough with them? Like you set them, but then when people disrespect it, you do nothing about it. Or on the flip side, do you alienate people too much because your boundaries are too rigid? Did you even know that boundaries can be too rigid? I will make you a $7 million bet that you had an "oh fuck, that's me" moment with one of those. Well, that's good, because that's what today's video is all about. All the boundaries. In this video, we are gonna look at what the fuck boundaries even are, how to set them, and how to maintain that shit. Because let's be honest, that's what people struggle with the most. I know I do. Stay tuned until the end when I reveal my favorite hacks for boundaries. Yep, boundaries can have hacks too.
Potty, she talking naughty. Here to help your trouble, she don't judge nobody. Even if you're not at your top and it's a lie, she try to make you see a different train of thought.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Welcome back to my channel. I am the Pottymouth Guru, and I am your trucker-mouthed East Coast therapist, where my mission is to help you learn how to yourself. And that boundary thing, yeah, a lot of needed there for like everybody, most people. I'm still working on my boundaries hard. If you come from childhood trauma, if you struggle with codependency and low self-esteem, if you're a people pleaser, a fixer, a martyr, boundaries are likely a struggle for you. Now let's look at what a boundary even motherfucking is. Boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify for them what are reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave around them and how they will respond when someone steps outside those lines. They help define your sense of self by separating your needs, desires, thoughts, and feelings from those of others. And the PMG version is the construction of a physical and emotional safe space that teach other people how to treat us so they don't fuck with our shit. Why are boundaries important? Boundaries are important because they help separate our feelings from other people's feelings and be aware of our own separate identity. Boundaries are like a super important form of self-care. They also create clear expectations. Most people want to get along and do the right thing. It's just that, like, without parameters, people are just like poking into the fucking dark, you know? Like this, like, where is it? Where? And when there are no clear expectations, humans have this funny little habit where they slide into the selfish side of things. And straight up, it's like not even fair to expect people to act a certain way if we've never expressed our parameters or preferences. Relationships that are filled with assumptions end up becoming unhealthy and increase the chances of having conflict and falling out. Relationships with no boundaries also end up creating an environment where there's a power imbalance. If there's one person in the relationship that has trouble standing up for themselves and saying no, they might end up feeling like they have to give in all the time to keep the peace in the relationship. And then they often end up becoming dependent on the other person. Boundaries are also a sign of your worth. If you don't have strong boundaries, you might be putting yourself into a position to be used to please others. But if you have strong, defined boundaries and a strong sense of self and your core values, you will end up setting higher expectation in terms of who you allow into your life. And boundaries are gonna help you from losing your motherfucking self. Ever hear anyone say, "Oh man, I lost myself in that relationship"? Well, that's because they did. They didn't know where their feelings began and the other person's ended. And you're gonna fucking bleed out if you're in that situation. Bye-bye bandwidth. Goodbye autonomy. There is no safety in a situation like this. You feel like your needs are never being met, that you're not heard, you're not understood, and you always end up focusing on somebody else. Now, I have broken this down into 3 major steps. Tree. Number 1, the construct. So before we set boundaries, we gotta figure out what the fuck they even are. So this one's gonna take a little bit of introspection. Sitting down and having like a really good think about your current relationships. The ones that are going well, the ones that are not going well, how you're showing up in them, the ones that can improve, the ones that seriously suck balls. This might take some journaling or meditation or going for a walk in the woods, staring out a window, checking out a fireplace, like whatever makes your brain think. Figure out what your needs are, what needs to be adjusted, and where. And bro, you gotta get really honest with yourself. Couple questions to consider that are super important. The first one is why? Why do I want to change this relationship? And then what needs to be changed? Your why is everything. If you've ever done any kind of goal work, understanding your why is like what gets us to where we want to go. So figure out your why. Your why is going to act as your anchor in this process. So it could be something like you want your feelings to be considered more in a relationship. Maybe you have a sibling that's always poking fun at you whenever you're on the phone with them. They might be like joking and not meaning to offend you, but your feelings still get hurt and you don't want to deal with that shit. And every time you sort of mention it in like passing, they laugh it off as a joke. And they aren't really hearing you. So the why in this situation would be, I want my feelings to be considered. Another example is that your boss is always giving you all this extra work that ends up coming home with you. Or these days, it's just making you work from home until like 1 a.m. Your boss might just need shit done, and in a perfect world, they would consider the fact, oh wait, this person has a family and other things. We'd like them to understand that it is an inappropriate ask, but you know, life isn't perfect. And unless those parameters are set, it's gonna keep happening. Maybe your boss doesn't even know that you're feeling overwhelmed and can't take on anymore. I wanna make sure that I have time for other shit in my life. Important things, like self-care, especially right now. That shit needs to be more of a priority in my life. My own example is that I used to have a parent that I was in a deeply codependent relationship with, and this parent used to call me like, I shit you not, 10 times a day, every day. I used to take every single one of these calls, and it used to make me completely insane. They make it seem like every phone call was an emergency and they needed me, and I was like, fuck man, I cannot take that call. And I would say like, you have to stop calling me. The response would be a guilt trip. My why was, I want autonomy in this relationship. Step number 2, declare that shit. So like, state it. Okay, now you've identified your why and you've identified your what. Now it's time to set that boundary. This might be like super fucking hard for some people. I totally get it. But let's just say you muster up the courage and you're like totally resolved that you're gonna fucking say it. Let's use the example of your sibling poking fun at you. It can sound something like this. Hey, Rapunzel, love Disney. Our relationship is really important to me, and I wanted to mention something to you. I've noticed that you always poke fun at my weight or my intelligence every time we're on the call. You might be joking around, but that shit actually hurts my feelings, and I'd really like for you to stop. The goal needs to be assertive, so not aggressive, just clear. Now, the response might be great. It might be accepted, it might be understood, you might end up feeling seen and heard, or it might end up being a big old motherfucking fight. There could be all sorts of different reactions with your new boundary. Here are some reasons of why that might be. They might be just used to you being a certain way, and then all of a sudden you're being another way, and they're like, what the fuck? Why aren't you the old way? And you're saying, yo, I'm not gonna be that way anymore. And that could trigger like hundreds of different responses in them. Some people might take a boundary as a rejection. Some people might not like that boundary because that means that they are losing control over you. And they have some control issues, and boundaries threaten control. Whatever the reaction is, the goal might not be so easy, but the goal is to separate ourselves from the reaction of the other person. If there was ever a motherfucking time for not my circus, not my monkeys, it is now. Because this is hard. Especially if you're a people pleaser and struggling with codependency issues. But at the end of the day, their feelings are not your responsibility. This is the time to recognize that we are doing something that's really fucking hard for us, and we need to honor ourselves and soothe ourselves and take care of ourselves in these moments. We gotta do what we gotta do. Step number 3. And now, the hard part. Wait, what? I thought the last part was the hard part. Fuck. Keeping the boundary. Fuck my life. This is what many people struggle with the most. And it happens to be the most important part. Doing what you said you were gonna do. This is staying in integrity to yourself and the other person. So that means when next time you're on the phone with Rapunzel and she cracks a joke about how you've never been able to spell the word maneuver, this is where you pipe in and remind her. Hey, do you remember when I asked you not to poke fun at me when we were on calls together? Well, you're doing it again and I really don't appreciate it. This is where shit can get fucking messy. This might end up sending the person receiving the boundary into a motherfucking tailspin. And our people pleaser might be having a fucking heart attack. And then all of a sudden it feels like somebody put baby in the corner. The knee jerk is that we submit and go back to the way that we were before. The old way of functioning in that relationship. But this is the place that you have to muster up all the fucking power of Grayskull and not do that shit, because it ends up reinforcing for the other person that if they tantrum, guilt you, manipulate you, whatever bad behavior, that they can get you to be back the old way that you were before. This is bad. We don't want that. Now you might be sitting here thinking, well, fuck that shit. I would rather deal with this shit than deal with that conflict. I'ma just stay this way. But two things about that. One is that you're going to end up remaining a doormat and disrespected and resentful about it. And that shit is going to erode at your self-esteem and erode at your relationship with this person. And number two, you might end up missing the opportunity of walking through the hard moments with this person to end up on the other side with a really beautiful relationship. Balanced and a healthy one. I'll give you an example of my story with the parent that had the 780,000 motherfucking calls every goddamn day, and also to add not being able to actually even get off the phone when I was on the phone. I started to not pick up the calls all the time, just when it worked for me. I knew that the millions of voicemails that were being left to me were going to be filled with guilt and manipulation, so I stopped listening to the messages altogether, just deleting them. I let them know that I couldn't just be there at their beck and call, that I had work and other responsibilities, that I didn't always have bandwidth, that I wasn't always feeling up to it. And this parent brought a lot of anger and sadness and complaining and negative shit that was just like fucking exhausting. And they definitely took it as a rejection, to the point where they took it as an abandonment. Even though I offered tons of validation and told them I love them and that the relationship was important to me, didn't matter. I had to hang up on the phone calls after saying, okay, I really have to let you go now. The person wouldn't let me off the phone. I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna hang up now. And then I'd hang up. Like, I wasn't a dick about it or anything. There were conflicts. There was me buckling and then reestablishing the boundary again, which was messy as fuck, by the way. They would try to emotionally punish me by saying that I was causing them horrible, tragic pain, or they would stonewall me or guilt me every time we did talk. I had to set another boundary around that, Jesus in the fucking garden. And sometimes they would also say like really mean shit to me. Things that triggered me to fuck, like I was selfish, that I didn't care about them, that I was a bad daughter. And I had to like not respond to that. I had to take a moment. 50, actually. I had to take the time to reflect on whether these things were true, and the answer that I came up with was fucking no! This went on for years. Exhausting, right? Now this is definitely an extreme example, and many of you don't have an example like this. But I use this example to show you that this is so possible. What happened, you asked? I shall tell you. Now we talk once or twice a week. Sometimes we even skip a week or two. And when we do talk, it's usually them letting me off the phone. The inappropriate things that they used to insist on talking about on the phone barely get mentioned. If something challenging comes up, we are so much more equipped and in a better place to talk through it. Our relationship is like 17,000 times better because I stuck to my guns. I never gave up on myself, and I never gave up on my relationship with this parent. On both fronts, it was worth it. Hard as fuck, but worth it. In closing, just kidding. Here are my boundary hacks to take to the goddamn boundary bank. Hack number 1. Micro boundaries. Start small so that you can practice. I'd love to go for a drink tonight, but I have to study for my exam later this week. I'll let you know if my plans change. Super clear with not really even an opportunity for the other person to negotiate. We want to set ourselves up for success. So it's not about conquering that, like the scariest fucking boundary that you can fathom with the scariest person in your life. Don't start there. You'll likely fuck it up, especially if it's the beginning of your journey. Start small, practice. Hack number 2, encourage them with praise and validation. So much more effective than negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement. We learned this with dogs. Tell them things like, thank you so much for not pushing me to go out for a drink with you. It means a lot. Or, thanks so much for understanding that I can't take on all this extra work this week. The rest will recharge and refocus me. Let me buy you a beer one day after work this week. Or, thank you for respecting my boundary. I feel really heard, and I just feel so much closer to you now. goal is to reward the good behavior and encourage them to keep doing it. Okay, for reals, in closing, boundaries are hard, but they're so worth it. Okay, I want to know some shit about you now. I want to hear about your journey with boundaries. Where are your biggest struggles and what's worked for you? Just remember that it might actually help someone else who's reading the comments. Thank you so much for joining me on this fucking difficult journey of boundaries. If you like this video, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. Please share it with somebody that you think might take value from this. And if you hit that little bell thingy, you will never miss a video. It comes out every single Friday, 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, noon Newfoundland time. Same bat channel next week. Bye.